So again, my name is Chern-Hooi Lim. I was born and raised in Malaysia in a small town called Batu Pahat. So at age 17, I left home and came to the US through an exchange program. And later that year, I applied to Drexel University and got into and also awarded the scholarship. So Drexel is really known for their co-op program or extensive fellowship, internship program, where I had the opportunity to work in chemical company like Roman Haas, now Dow Chemical. So with stipend for my co-op and scholarships, I largely self-financed my own undergraduate with some help from the family. So in 2010, I attended University of Colorado under the supervision of Professor Charles Musgrave. So by the way, it's the same Musgrave that was mentioned in previous talks. So I'd like to thank my advisor, Charles Musgrave. And also in 2016, I joined the Miyake group for my postdoc in the chemistry department at CU Boulder, later at Colorado State University. I had a pretty productive academic career, published 30 papers, including 15 JACs in the science publications. In early 2019, I co-founded New Iridium with a vision to produce chemicals sustainably. So I left beautiful Colorado and decided to stay to build my career and also my family here. So shown in the picture here is one of my favorite activities, climbing up 14,000 feet mountains. So at this elevation, the view is spectacular, and it can literally take your breath away climbing this high. And my son Damien was born November 2019. So it's one of the happiest thing and spending time with my family. So traveling has been always a passion before COVID. So shown here is a picture of our 2018 European trip to a small town in Italy called Cinque Terre by the Mediterranean. So I play competitive badminton, and this is how I meet friends from around the world and all walks of life. So I'd like to get into my PhD work. So my PhD work really centers on the chemical reduction of CO2 to fuel. So by recycling CO2 to fuel, we effectively close the carbon cycle, and it's a promising solution to global climate change. So my approach was to use computational chemistry to really understand the theoretical underpinnings of catalysis, and that will help me to design better ones. So the reduction of CO2 fundamentally involved proton-coupled electron transfer steps. So using pyridine as a model, first I looked at the one electron and one proton radical pathway. And so later, looking at two electron pathway derived from the reduction product of pyridine, which is dihydropyridine. So I was able to map out the entire potential energy surface through a series of hydride and proton transfer step mediated by a proton relay from CO2 to formic acid to formaldehyde and to methanol. So theory has always been applied after the fact, after experimental discovery. So however, I see theory can play a much bigger role where we can, actually make predictions beforehand and which will guide experimental outcome. So I would like to change that paradigm a little bit. So therefore, I was eager to try to prove out my renewable organohydride concept and started a crowdfunding, having the public donated $6,000 towards this project. So with some delay in 2019, finally we got it published in JACs. So this was a first system and also an ambiguous system to show that a renewable organohydride is capable of direct reduction of CO2 to formate, contrary to previous belief that only transition metal hydride can do this. So moving on to my postdoctoral work in the Miyake group. Here I acquire new skill sets in synthetic organic chemistry. So Professor Miyake really, he had a vision of achieving a metal-free ATRP, or atom transfer radical polymerization. So ATRP is a technique to make polymer with controlled architectures and uniform molecular weight for high-end applications. So ATRP has been traditionally catalyzed by copper-1 species, but however, metal contamination can occur when it was cannot be fully purified, and therefore a metal-free organic species can have the advantage. In this case, the metal-free species is an organic photocatalyst using light as a stimuli. So here I was able, so this project really started towards the end of my PhD, extended into my postdoc. So here I was able to apply theory first to actually come up with a number of candidates, organic candidates that we can down select actually on the computer and identify a few candidates to be proved out experimentally. So this led to the discovery of dihydrophenazines, later published in Science. So the same approach later, we applied to discover phenoxazines, dihydroacridines, and benzopyrrolines, having different redox potentials for a wide ranging of applications. So I was also heavily involved in the mechanistic studies. So for example, the dihydrophenazines is really intriguing because they form a big dipole moment in the excited states, observable experimentally by extensive solvatochromism from red to blue in solvent of different polarity. So next is redox reversibility. So for a catalyst to be long-lived and turnover and have many turnover numbers, so in the case of those organic photocatalysts, we have to design a radical cation that doesn't degrade and can turn over the reaction many times. So we also look at the nuance between electron and energy transfer when a transition metal is involved as a co-catalyst and how that affects catalysis. And finally, I had the honor to work with Professor Damrauer and his group to look at how spectroscopy can look at excited state evolution from femtosecond to pico and ultimately to nanoseconds. So with that, we were able to design photocatalysts with having different triplet yield from 5% to 90%, for example, and lifetimes of those catalysts are in the milliseconds, which is very long for an excited state species. So later in my postdoc work, I was involved in extending synthetic applications of those organic photocatalysts, how we can make it more useful and do other work. So first we look at cross-coupling reactions, typically applying the pharmaceutical space, and was traditionally catalyzed by palladium and heat. However, in this case, our phenoxazines can actually work in tandem with a more abundant nickel T2 species. So in this case, achieving a grand slam of cross-coupling, so that phenoxazine can actually perform C&N, CS, CO, and CC cross-couplings with the aid of nickel. So we later also made the discovery that nickel complexes by themselves without photocatalysts can also undergo direct photoexcitations. However, needing a bluer photons like 365 nanometer. So this also suggests an energy transfer mechanism between nickel and photocatalyst when it was present. So the reaction really lies at its simplicity. So, and here, all you need is dose in your air halides and some excess amines and sprinkle some nickel 2 salts and shine lights on it. So you don't even need to remove oxygen or water, and in less than 1 hour, you get 90% of the C&N cross-coupling products. So this was one of the most read JAX paper of the year when it was first published. So secondly is on the Birch reduction. So I was fortunate to work with talented postdocs and graduate students in the Miyake lab. So Birch reduction traditionally is mediated by alkaline metals to generate solvated electrons. However, this has largely precluded its use in large-scale synthesis because it's quite dangerous. So here we actually came up with benzopyrrolines undergo a sequence of 2 photon excitation to generate the solvated electrons at will when we shine light on it. and performing burst reduction under benchtop conditions. So finally, CO2 to methane work. So here we collaborated with a group, Mark Robert group in France. So combining our organic phenoxazine photocatalyst and activating their iron porphyrin catalyst such that we can access different oxidation states from iron 3 to iron 0, reducing CO2 to methane. So at the time of publication, this was the first precious metal-free homogeneous photochemical system for such reduction. So fast forward to 2019. So this is where I'm at right now. So in 2019, co-founded New Iridium Inc. With a vision to produce chemicals more sustainably. So we are tackling one of the biggest problems facing humanity today, namely global climate change with excess CO2 accumulated in the air and in the ocean. So we are working on solutions of how we can convert CO2 to chemicals and fuels economically. So I think the word economical is important because this is how you're going to get a solution to be implemented. So we have actually identified a number of candidates. We actually can have both a greener and cheaper solution, such that it makes sense to implement it on an industrial scale. So we truly believe that photocatalysis offers unique mode of activation to produce those chemicals effectively and cheaply. So I would like to thank the C&EN again for this honor. Thank you very much. And I also like to thank my mom and sisters, my wife and my son, my in-laws, my coworkers and co-founders at New Iridium, the Abels family, my host family in Pennsylvania, my friends at Badminton, the Musgrave group and the Miyake group. You guys are the pillars to my success. I really appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chern, for telling us about your story. You mentioned that your company started in early 2019. You had your child later that year, and then a little something happened at the beginning of 2020. I'm wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about the process of trying to start a company amid, a pandemic where things are shut down. Obviously it's your first company, but what were the types of challenges that you encountered?
Yeah, so I think everybody wished they had the experience to know how to deal with pandemic. The last pandemic was 100 years ago. So yeah, definitely it was a very stressful time. We essentially have to close down for a few months, not knowing when we're going to open up and the funding can run dry. So, however, for entrepreneur, when you're given lemon, you will make lemonade. So yeah, we were able to keep the lights on. So we actually was pivoting a little bit. So we actually got an NSF grant to work on the COVID problems. So how we can, for example, work on synthesis of remdesivir using photocatalysis. So actually, it's kind of fortunate as well. Actually, things are better during pandemic for us, actually. And this is, during pandemic, we actually secured 2 industrial projects with 2 companies. I guess those people are staying at home. Those tech scouts are staying at home. They pay more attention to startup and make deals. So, yeah, I think it was a hard time, but, I'm happy that we got through it and,
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for the great talk.